Welcome to What's Up Wednesday. My name is Craig Mackay, your host. We have a very special guest with us today, where the word success is an everyday thing, like a walk in the park. So what's her secret, and how does she make and help others make their startup businesses so successful? We will find out today. But first, thanks for joining us. Do you have your plans all worked out for the holiday season? Will you be visiting family and friends? Well, I hope so. If you do happen to be home alone for a day, you can always check into our YouTube channel for past recordings of What's Up Wednesday and other great content at the CMC-Canada YouTube channel, or check out the podcast series done by Jane Grieve from CMC BC Institute. What's Up Wednesday is a digital series brought to you by the Institute of Certified Management Consultants of Ontario in cooperation with CMC Canada. We've made a commitment to be here every month on the second Wednesday of each month. We've got a great lineup planned for 2023. On January 11th, Adapting Relationship Building for the Virtual World. My guest will be Michael Hughes. He's a LinkedIn guru. You may have heard of him. Sales, marketing, and relationship building. His expertise, he will present ways to use social media tools to build your network. In February, on the 8th, we hope to look at coaching a champion. How can management consultants use coaching techniques to their advantage? March 8th will be Women in Consulting again, a very popular show this year. Our guest host, Jennifer Smith, will be compiling an impressive panel of guests. That'll be March 8th. Also coming up in the new year, some celebrations and awards nights in person. We're going to meet in person. The GTA has a night set for Thursday, January 19th for their awards night, and Eastern Ontario EOC chapter celebration awards nights, all part of the CMC Ontario Awards for new CMCs and new fellows into the FCMCs, again in person in Ottawa on Thursday, January 26th in the early evening timeframe. If you're a guest today, welcome. Great to see you here. You should consider a full-time membership. There are many benefits to the CMC Canada Association, such as belonging to an international network of management consultants that can open doors to a global consulting practice and get you official approval to work in the USA. There is also our Management Advisory Service, which is funded by the National Research Council and IRAP. There's a lot of great work going on there, and billable days for our members available to those with their certified management consulting status. If you don't have your MAS, maybe you should check into that. Now, how about paying it forward? Consider giving back to your community. Check out our pro bono program. Reaching out in your community can be helpful and rewarding. You'll boost your reputation and create goodwill. For more information, email probono@cmc-ontario.ca. All right, let's get this show going. As usual, please remain in your seats on mute. Send your questions. Actually, you can do yoga exercises if you want. Send your questions in via the chat. I will monitor the chat and try to pose your question in the Q&A portion of the show in about 35 minutes. I've already got a few questions lined up for our guest speaker, Kayla Isabelle. Kayla is the CEO at Startup Canada. They provide Canada's entrepreneurs with the tools, community connections, and support they need to support and build their businesses. This is something we as management consultants also do. So the synergies are of direct interest to me, and I believe to many of our members and attendees today. Kayla Isabelle has a packed resume in the startup industry. In addition to CEO at Startup Canada, she's past president of the International Association of Business Communications, Ottawa chapter, board member at Startup Sault Ste. Marie, and former board member of the Canadian Public Relations Society. Kayla sits on the Allied for Startups Continental Council and supports international communities, including SXSW, the Tanzania Tourist Board, and Startup Bridge in India. With a passion for mentorship, Kayla serves as a Founder Institute mentor at How to Change the World Charity Mentor and has run the IABC Members Connect mentorship program. She's a Carleton University Network mentor, yay Carleton, and an Algonquin College mentor. Kayla has also worked as a coach at the World Skills Employment Center for Newcomers to Canada. She's host of her own show, the Startup Women's Podcast. Most recently, congratulations, Kayla, on being awarded the 2022 Top 40 Under 40 recognition of the Ottawa Business Journal and the Ottawa Board of Trade. I think it's a real tribute. So glad to have you here on our show. I'm looking forward to hearing more about the keys to success that you've implemented at Startup Canada. Hi.
Thank you so much, Craig. Wow, what an intro.
I'm getting geared up for the holidays.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for that fabulous introduction, Craig, and for having me on the show. Is that what we call it? Sort of, yeah, we're sort of here in good company on today's presentation. So as Craig mentioned, my name is Kayla Isabelle, and I'm the CEO of an organization called Startup Canada. We are a national nonprofit that helps connect Canadian founders with resources far and wide. That might be relationships that they want to build with different private sector institutions, with their financial institutions, with incubators, accelerators, mentorship programs, and then the actual practical tools that they can leverage to build their business. So think QuickBooks, Xero, various web providers, et cetera. So we've got a very, very wide network of partners and a very colorful community of entrepreneurs that we serve each and every day. Today's presentation is really giving you a glimpse into the nuts and bolts of what that looks like. So I'm super excited to share some of those stats and outline some of what we're seeing in Canada. First and foremost, we want to do a brief digital land acknowledgement. The Startup Canada head office is based in Ottawa, where I am currently situated as well. And that is located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. Our team is also remote, and Startup Canada recognizes the inherent and treaty rights of all Indigenous peoples, and we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territories of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. If you are not familiar already with the land that you are residing on today, I really recommend taking a moment and reviewing that information online and doing your own digital land acknowledgement if you'd like to do so. We'll go over to the next slide. So we're going to cover a lot of ground today. There is, an incredible ecosystem in Canada for entrepreneurs. And this is what makes my job both incredibly inspiring and energy filled, and no day is the same. But things have evolved so much in the last couple of years. And I know all of your lived experiences as management consultants, as entrepreneurs, potentially yourselves. It's been a really challenging last, 24 to 36 months for many of us. And for the community that we serve, early stage founders, we've seen a tremendous amount of change. And even reviewing our 2022 programs, there's been more iteration and more evolution that we've seen in that community. So today we'll try to cover as much as possible in what we're seeing in the landscape. I'll give you a quick update on Startup Canada's programming that might be of interest to all of you or to your network. Everything that we do is completely free and accessible, so you're more than welcome to join the Startup Canada family. We'll talk a little bit about the state of entrepreneurship, where things currently land. We'll be reviewing some census data, overall data from some of our partners, and where we see things moving forward. We'll go through what help founders are actually looking for in this day and age. And that could be from the lens of, potential client perspective. That could just be building your awareness of the business community at large across a number of different industries. But we'll talk about some of those trends. We've seen a huge shift in social impact entrepreneurship. So I'll give some kind of overviews around how those trends are changing and how entrepreneurs are really solving the world's most pressing and challenging problems. I'll do a little bit of a showcase of some incredible founders that if you're just looking for a little bit of inspiration and trying to get some examples of Canadian great business stories, we'll do a quick outline of that and then open up for discussion and Q&A. You are more than welcome to drop questions into the chat function throughout. I'm happy to kind of double click on any of these stats throughout the presentation. And then Fabulous Craig will be also keeping me accountable if there's anything that pops up that I don't see. So as I've mentioned, Startup Canada really is the gateway to Canada's entrepreneurial ecosystem. We connect founders to those tools, to the different types of communities, just like this one, and support that they need to start. So really early stage businesses, when you have an idea and you're looking to actually bring it into fruition, and then build on a really strong foundation, hopefully contribute to Canada's GDP, hopefully go global one day as well and export into new markets, and create a really vibrant and successful entrepreneurship landscape across Canada. At Startup Canada, we've got a number of flagship programs, and how we do this is sort of industry specific and demographic specific. So we have a Startup Women program that's dedicated to women founders. This year, we connected just under 5,000 women through that program, which has been really incredible. I'll speak to some of the stats of the areas we've seen shifts in terms of investment of women entrepreneurs, et cetera. But this is a huge market that we support. We also have a Startup Global program that helps entrepreneurs navigate export environments. So what does it actually look like to export either your product or your service into the US, and then top 5 tech export destinations as well. So think UK, France, Australia, those types of countries, but US being about 80% of the target market of this audience group. We work with government, we work with private sectors like partners like UPS on the shipping and distribution side. And then we also work with a network of ecosystem support organizations that work in these spaces as well. Excellent. Awesome. Up next, we can hop back over to that other slide. There we go. So we also have a Startup Gov program that is rooted in advocacy. So we bring together the perspectives of diverse founders from all across the country. We connect them to the federal government to make recommendations on new funds that we think should be enacted. Big challenges in terms of even applying for some of these programs and the time required to access a lot of services coming from government. So we sort of create those spaces where we can have productive conversations and make core recommendations to ultimately make entrepreneurship a little bit easier. And then we enable that through our Startup Communities Network. This is a fabric of support organizations, community leaders across the entire country that give us boots on the ground and a true national perspective while our team is headquartered in Ottawa. Awesome. So in 2021, just to show the type of scale that we have at Startup Canada, we had over 120 events. This year, I think we surpassed that even further, but roughly we support around 120 to 130,000 entrepreneurs each year. That's through all of our flagship programs, digital, those ones that I just described as well. And we really try to celebrate and share information also through our podcasts and our digital platform. So this is just a quick reach slide. So in Canada, we do not have a consistent term for what a startup is. Is it a high growth venture? Is it an organization that is under 3 years old? Is it the number of employees? Everybody has a slightly different definition of what a startup is. At Startup Canada, we define it as an early stage founder, somebody most likely under 3 years in their cycle, who is looking to bring their idea to life with 1 to 9 employees, under $1 million in revenue, and a slightly scalable venture, but we don't just exclusively look at high growth traditional tech that you might assume within the startup community has alignment there. We're talking early stage businesses, and that's tech and beyond. In Canada, we have a tremendous number of new ideas, new founders, new businesses that are starting up, but we also have a tremendous number of founders that have to sunset those organizations or fail forward in bringing those ideas to life, realizing that there's not really a market or a customer or funding to then bring that business into the next stage. So they sunset as well and start new ventures. So there's a tremendous amount of churn that you see in the entrepreneurship ecosystem. What we try to do at Startup Canada is make sure that those businesses are entering into the best and most favorable conditions, that they're getting connected to the right resources in that infancy layer so that they are set up foundationally more properly, and that they ultimately can scale from that strong foundation. Next slide. 98% of those businesses are small businesses in Canada. This is really, you hear the term, the backbone of the Canadian economy. Small businesses is big business in Canada. And we see that very clearly in the stats of where that energy is going. 55% of those businesses are micro enterprises, so still on that very, very small side. And of the private sector workforce that are employed by small businesses, 78% are within that private sector, over 8 million Canadians working within this overall space. We do have businesses that fail often, but we actually have a really strong success and survival rate past the first 5 years of operations at 70%. And these are what's the statistics? That's the word I'm looking for. These are stats from ISED and from various QuickBooks reports that we have worked on with our various partners. So this sort of shows a bit of a forecast in what we see at a glance. Now to the next slide. COVID obviously threw this very upside down. We saw founders coming out of the woodwork. We saw many side hustles turn full-time because of a number of different reasons. But again, we saw a lot of chaos, a lot of churn, a lot of new businesses starting and potentially sunsetting, but also a lot of entrepreneurial energy in the air during a very challenging economic climate. 1 in 5 founders that we see right now in Canada started during the pandemic. That's 20%. And that is for a myriad of reasons. Some had more spare time and were looking to take on some type of hobby. Some faced financial pressures that really catalyzed their entrepreneurial ambitions. This, looking at the tourism industry and heavily impacted industries that we saw during the pandemic, that was entrepreneurship out of necessity. They needed to create new businesses to feed their families. And then quite a few entrepreneurs as well were seeing an unmet demand in a certain market and saw potential. We saw this a lot in tech. Now that we were all working from home, what did it look like to actually support the mental health of your employees? We saw lots of booming tech companies trying to solve that problem. So many were finding a unique opportunity during a challenging time. And that's where we see incredible innovation come from. The last recession, we saw the Ubers of the world pop up during the pandemic as well. We've seen some massive players expand. So lots of different intentions, but to my point earlier, lots of movement during the pandemic. In terms of the impact from founders, here are just some quick stats on what has happened in terms of growth, pausing, pivoting. That really became the word of the pandemic. But overall, the state of entrepreneurship, many entrepreneurs have had to delay their retirement. This stat actually surprised me quite a bit, that only 25% were working longer hours. Everybody I knew was working longer hours. Tremendous amount of debt taken on during the pandemic as well. And that also resulting in foregone salary, shifted salary models, and compromised livelihood for many of the founders in our communities. So lots of impact during the pandemic. We focus a lot on the mental health of entrepreneurs. And now more than ever, this has been a conversation in large corporates that we've been focusing on. I'm sure within your communities and with your clients, you've been chatting through this as well. But 76% of founders in this survey say that running a business is stressful. I would say that's 100%. There's always going to be higher stakes in running your own venture. But there is also a large movement in the entrepreneurship community to share the challenges of what is actually happening in their businesses. 50% believe that there's actually not enough mental health support for them in meeting their needs. They're worried about money. They're worried about failure. They're worried about burnout. Being an entrepreneur is incredibly demanding, not just on the practical side of finding the right tools and resources and financing and sales and all those great parts, but the burden that entrepreneurs have on their shoulders is immense. And we've seen a lot of that get exacerbated during the pandemic in the last couple of years. So mental health, definitely the forefront of a lot of conversations we're having. That's fine. In terms of capital and looking at underrepresented founders, we've seen, a bit of a reckoning in terms of looking at more equitable institutions, systems that we all live and work in, and making sure that we are creating more equal spaces and opportunities, both beyond gender and just looking at women-led ventures entering into the space, but looking at Black founders, LGBTQ2+, and underrepresented entrepreneurs within our community. Abysmally, only 2% of venture capital funding remains in the hands of women founders. This stat has gone slightly up, I think maybe to 2.8, and then went actually back down to 2% in last year, which is incredibly disappointing. And we're trying to make a lot more noise around this type of stat, but that remains a huge, huge challenge within the entrepreneurship space. We also see a tremendous amount of discrimination, of lack of trust with various financial institutions, and lost opportunities for these underrepresented founders. So something to notionally be aware of, both in terms of your purchasing power and who you're actually supporting with your dollars, and then as well in the supports you might be offering clients or looking within the entrepreneurship ecosystem. A tremendous amount of bias that is impacting their kind of overall beginning and their growth. Next. Newcomers to Canada and rural founders. This is, has been a really key priority of our federal government. And we're seeing a huge increase in newcomers coming to Canada through a program called Startup Visa. This is more just sort of general. I don't know if this is a target audience for many of you, but we are seeing big booms in fantastic ideas coming from newcomers into Canada, and a boost in rural entrepreneurship. Now that people aren't working in these large urban centers anymore and traveling to work, we've actually seen really shifting perceptions on rural growth, and supporting local businesses that are truly in much more local environments versus in large urban centers. So lots of interesting work there too. We're seeing lots of diversity and inclusion actually improving across the ecosystem overall. We're seeing more diversity in boards and advisory supports, much a bigger movement in creating and prioritizing diverse teams. And hopefully that is what you are also seeing within all of your communities. So we're not where we need to be, but we have seen a lot of growth in those spaces. Well, this slide shows by industry, where are we actually seeing the most movement, the most representation. This shifts by program within Startup Canada, but this is also based on our last year's census. So we're just compiling our new census to capture for 2022. So lots in retail trade, arts and media, accommodation, agri-tech, agriculture and forestry, clean tech. But really what this slide represents is our entrepreneurship community across Canada is very diverse. It's not just in key export markets or in one specific segment. We have incredible innovations coming from across and from an industry agnostic perspective. So lots of opportunities from a client base and sort of a sentiment that entrepreneurship runs deep in creating these innovative new ventures across a number of different industries. So that's really what this slide's all about. On the type of venture side, we are seeing, for-profit ventures obviously being the most common, but we're seeing an increase in for-profit social enterprises. So these are businesses that are a traditional for-profit structure, but that are looking to align to a sustainable development goal. So think climate change, gender equity, think, all of the different SDGs that the UN is really focusing on. We're seeing a huge boost in people wanting to make a profit and also wanting to be purposeful in that venture. These stats every single year have gone up, which I think is really encouraging to see the entrepreneurship landscape, not just looking to solve day-to-day problems within a specific lens, but actually looking at helping the world as a whole and solve some of those most pressing global challenges. So an encouraging snapshot as well. And during the pandemic, that increased, I would say, tenfold. We saw many more purpose-built ventures starting out during the pandemic. Well, what founders need. This, interestingly enough, has not really shifted during the pandemic. If anything, it has potentially been exacerbated, but funding is the #1 ask that we get at Startup Canada every single day. Where do I find money? Where do I find funding? What types of capital can I actually leverage? What type of debt should I be considering? Do I talk to a financial institution or do I go straight to an angel investor? The awareness of the different offerings around funding, there's a huge gap that remains there, in addition to vehicles that actually get funding into the hands of small businesses being few and far between. We have lots of investors trying to invest in high growth, scalable companies, and that will always be the case. We're seeing a bit of a resetting of that now that some of that money is getting more expensive to be deployed, which is a natural shift that we were expecting. But funding remains a top challenge for every early stage founder that we work with. Business planning and mentorship are sort of secondary and third. Those have sort of toggled back and forth within the last couple of years. But mentorship, specifically for women founders, has ended up being almost a bit of a divisive topic in that more women, to my point earlier around the amount of venture capital funding going to women, we need less mentorship and more money is definitely the sentiment that is coming through, which I wholeheartedly agree with. So while the mentorship stats here are quite high, there is more of a push to focus less on the mentorship side and more on the actual capital that gets deployed. Web and marketing, understanding incorporation. I know this sounds like a very specific element, but understanding how to actually set up their business. Owner is a great partner of ours that's doing some incredible work in just helping entrepreneurs navigate what that federally looks like versus provincially versus as a nonprofit, or if you're going to be a B Corp, or all these different ways that you can get incorporated and assess your business. Taxes, legal, education, tech adoption, and pitching are also on that list. And from my perspective, on the tech adoption piece, this is a key priority of the federal government. You're seeing billions of dollars now being invested there. It's not actually one of the top areas that our founders are saying that they need support with, but they do want access to the right tools that are tech-based. So it's, I think, potentially mislabeled here a little bit that they might not be looking for specific tech adoption support the same way that they are funding, but it's an essential puzzle piece to that sort of foundation of their business. As I mentioned as well, funding delegation is not very equitable. We see a lot of challenges in terms of seed funding, so that being very early stage funding for founders before a traditional early stage. And then later stage founders obviously having more traction, having an actual business to market to some of those investors and a proof of concept that they can actually use. It is always going to be challenging for very early stage businesses to identify funding opportunities when they do not have a whole network of customers or they don't have their product validated by the market. So this is where an organization like Startup Canada comes into play to try to make that business as robust as possible, get them connected to entities that can help them validate that product or that offering so that they can then get into the stages where they're going to be able to find different types of investment based on what works best for them. But we will continue to see this trend. And, I'm not of the spirit of saying, everybody should get $10,000 to start a business, because then we probably have a lot of bad businesses. But some people, definitely need to access some of that capital, and a lot of privilege comes into those conversations. Raising, a mom and dad or, family seed round is not an option for everyone. So we often see people skipping through that step based on their circumstance. How do we solve some of those problems around equity? That different type of equity in some of those gaps. Motivations of today's founders. I mentioned this briefly before as well, that we're seeing very different motivating factors from different generations. Money remains a top motivating factor, as it should. We are building our livelihoods. We are trying to pay rent. We are houses or, putting food on the table, and that is getting more and more expensive. So this will remain, a top priority for anybody looking to build a business. But we are seeing a focus on creative freedom, on making an actual difference. And some of those stats varying by generation, but we're seeing movement in the intentions of entrepreneurial energy, including that profitable entity, but also being more purposeful as well. There is some, I would describe, toxic is too strong of a word, but entrepreneurship is still hard, even if you're doing it as a digital nomad and the beaches of Bali and having a great time. There is this sentiment from some that We're seeing a lot of stories that are maybe a little bit too smoke and mirrors around what it actually looks like to be an entrepreneur, and people glamorizing that life. But we are just seeing people wanting more out of their day-to-day life and experience, and especially during the pandemic, working for organizations that they don't align with or that their values are inherently opposed to. They've seen entrepreneurship as a great vehicle to bring those values to life, and that transferring across a couple of different generations too. Gorgeous. We also see a lot of different motivating factors between men and women. So this is an interesting slide to me, in that women, for example, are more interested in setting their own hours, potentially a bit more creative freedom, and that purposeful, meaningful contribution to work, in addition to the flexibility of taking vacation or just having that sort of linked with your setting your own hours, that flexibility. That also is because of the natural responsibilities that women often play in more traditional, structures, and the weight and the burden that we see women founders hold in addition, or in contrast to some of their male counterparts. So this shows different motivating factors, but also as a product of the situations that most traditionally women find themselves in and needing required sort of flexibility to accommodate other priorities. So an interesting stat there. As I mentioned before, founders are aligning to the Sustainable Development Goals. If you're wondering what those are, this is the list that the UN uses. So poverty, hunger reduction, good health, quality education. We're seeing a lot of businesses align to these SDGs. There's also funding that gets attached to some of these SDGs. There's been federal government funding, provincial government funding to support ventures that are aligning. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think from banks, from financial institutions, people are talking about ESG in a completely different way now. But I'm forecasting that the system is going to start incentivizing alignment with some of these SDG goals more thoroughly over the next 5 to 10 years. Because if you don't measure something or prioritize it, it's just not going to happen. And so we'll see how that evolves. The percentages under here as well are the percentage of our founders aligning to these SDGs. So only about 20% are not aligning to any SDG. Notionally, many of the ventures that we're supporting can check one of these boxes in alignment. Awesome. We're also seeing customers crave and want this type of alignment. That good business is good business. As they say at Startup Canada, it's good for sales. Consumers are much more willing to pay higher price points for sustainable options. Today, 90% would spend an extra 10% on their products, knowing that it was sustainable. And that not being a greenwashed product, customers are actually getting much more literate in what it means to truly be sustainable versus, claiming to be. And we see those shifts in consumer behavior as well. Pending the impact of inflation on that, still not sure where that is going to land. But if we look at Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales in Canada and beyond, there's been no shortage of purchasing happening, even with rising costs of goods, which I find very, very fascinating. We also see that it creates a stronger workforce. 94% of millennials are wanting to use their skills for good. Money is still a part of that equation, but we're seeing much more on the talent side, less competition for ventures that are actually building purposeful ventures that have a better connection to a strong vision and mission. And we also see this sentiment of millennials expecting their favorite companies to make public declarations of their corporate citizenship. We saw a lot of that with Black Lives Matter movements and with other social movements and just global conflicts overall. There's a very different sentiment and expectation of what customers are expecting from the people they buy from. Cool. A couple of quick examples of some incredible founders that we have in the Startup Canada community. Off the Grid, they've just actually raised a $1 million seed round as of yesterday, which is super exciting. But they're a Quebec-based Quebec-based company dedicated to providing eco-responsible training equipment. So essentially, they have bikes, they have different machines that convert your energy into electricity. So they sell to various gyms and various large-scale spaces where they can create enough energetic energy to actually support the local grid. And they are aligning to a number of SDGs. We're seeing lots of really cool businesses just like Off the Grid that are starting up and solving problems through vehicles that we already have. Like this is a perfect example of innovation. They're taking, something that is a sedentary bike that everybody has at a gym and making it more purposeful and trying to squeeze more juice out of that lemon. So we've got a couple of examples as well. Craig, how are we doing on time? Should I go through some founder examples for the next 5?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we've got a couple of different amplified voices that we have on the next few slides, and some key recommendations that we have from founders across our community. We have, as I said, a very wide range of partner organizations and of entrepreneurs that we support. But from founders, what they are requesting is a myriad of solutions from all of these network partners. Narissa, who's the first face that we see here, is the CEO of the Black Business Association of BC. Her wish is to have that we don't have separate programs that meet the needs and break the systemic barriers of racism that are plaguing policies and institutions. So an actual true equitable ecosystem versus having siloed programs exclusively for Black founders. Connie Stacy is an incredible Edmonton-based founder who is trying to challenge entrepreneurs to really have a customer for your product. We saw this focus being so important as we saw tech financing really dry up in the last 6 to 9 months. Founders were relying on very cheap investment money. It was pretty, fast and furious that investors were writing checks left, right, and center last year. But what they forgot to figure out was who their customers are. What is your actual sales strategy? Without that type of funding, how are you going to keep this business afloat? So we've seen a massive resetting. I'm sure many of you have seen lots of layoffs happening over the last 6 months. And that's a testament to businesses that thrived in a capital intensive environment without focusing on the real value prop of their businesses, in my opinion. And so Connie is a great founder example that has scaled very intentionally, but trying to focus on that customer lens. Lindsay, as well, the founder of Nudnik, is an incredible sustainability organization. And that is front and center in her mission and vision in reducing fast fashion. And so we're seeing lots of different disruptors in that space. And Patrick Hunter as well is in the artistic community and is a great champion of kind of exploring, I'll just say his quote, being an entrepreneur is really just a lesson in figuring out who you are as a person, which I love that it's really coming home, right? You're figuring out what you're passionate about, what difference you want to make in the world, and what vehicle you're going to use to build that type of enterprise. So lots of varied perspectives coming from all of these different types of founders. We can maybe skip these next 3 slides. I think these are just some kind of case studies of different types of founders that we've worked with. But Richa is a great real person that we have worked with in the past. So another example of a venture that is aligning to an SDG. Richa runs an organization called Good Food for Good and is a for-profit social enterprise, to what I mentioned earlier. She's been able to create a completely new category of food products that is scaling, they're exporting, and she's really trying to change the conversation around how we develop our food and what type of CPG products we invest in that are really making a difference in that ecosystem. We've got Mystery Furtado as well, who runs an organization called Type Diabetes. She works in sort of the education and social services area and is a great example of a rural founder who is working in her local community, helping newcomers within that ecosystem navigate the Canadian food landscape. So understanding where to access fresh food, fruit and vegetables, how to create creative menu items, taking influence for newcomers from potentially their countries of origin and bringing that into the Canadian context. So another really incredible founder that is disrupting what has been a very traditional space in the past. Audette, Chris Naismith is the CEO of Audette as well. Another fantastic podcast episode that I would actually strongly recommend. I'll pop the link in the chat. But a founder that really preaches iterative improvement. And if you're looking for any, kind of big inspiration from founders that have had big, bold ideas that haven't worked and that they've had to recycle and redo and re-experiment over and over, Chris has been a really incredible champion of that type of work, and has now scaled this incredible clean tech venture that is helping businesses and helping large construction projects be more sort of clean and more efficient from a sustainability standpoint. So I'll pop that in the link once I'm done chatting with you as well. Mallory Green is another incredible founder that is disrupting the tech space and the art of dying, actually. She is helping people navigate their end-of-life care. And so what we also see in entrepreneurship is people disrupting areas that people are very uncomfortable talking about. And we've seen that during the pandemic. We've seen huge rises in groups like Willful. That many, people who've passed away in the last couple of years have not had a will. I think 40% of Canadians don't have a will. So they have disrupted that space to make sure that every Canadian can have access to that type of support. And that's encouraging. I think we see entrepreneurs solving these big problems, taking on these massive opportunities that others might be fearful of taking, that leap into. And they've ultimately created incredible systems that we get to plug into. Mallory's a great example that she's now made, what can be a very challenging time for many of us, at least more simple through the use of technology and social services, and is also building a for-profit social enterprise. So a huge boom in that space as well. That might not be as obvious. So all of those examples are really to say, entrepreneurship is here. Yes, it's been a super challenging last couple of years, but there have been so many incredible stories that have come through the pandemic. The demonstration of Canadian resilience and grit and energy. And all of that can be tapped into if you're an entrepreneur or not. The entrepreneurial sort of sentiment is something that all of us can live and breathe every day, even if we're not entrepreneurs ourselves. And in our ability to support those enterprises, your purchasing power is front and center. Who are you buying from? Who are you supporting? How can you yourself make these really great kind of diverse decisions in supporting a more equitable entrepreneurship landscape? Because each one of us can definitely show up and support those communities. And it's the holidays, so we can do that even more. So that's where we're at with entrepreneurship right now. I'm happy to answer any questions, drill into any more detail, but it's been a pleasure sharing some of our adventures with all of you today.
Fantastic. Excellent overview on the landscape as well, which I think really helps us as management consultants to position ourselves into that landscape, which has changed a lot in the last few years. One thing that as you said, everybody wants to get funding. It's the number one requirement. Where are some of the best places where you can help these people get their venture capital or seed capital?
It's a great question. So an organization that we often point founders to is called Pocketed. And I'll just pop that link in the chat. While funding is limited for early stage ventures, there are funds available, there are grants, there are subsidies, there are supports from a couple of different players. What we're seeing are entrepreneurs who struggle to find that seed funding. They're trying to solve that problem through tech. So Pocketed is a beautiful example. The founder of the organization had a first venture and could not find funding. So she built essentially a platform that scrapes and scrubs different funding opportunities and sort of plugs it into this Pocket platform. So you enter in some criteria. I'm women-led. I'm in this area of the country. I'm at this stage. I have this type of industry focus. And then it will essentially offer you a couple of different suggestions on possible funds, and then you can navigate through. There are a couple of other ventures that do this as well. One is called Hockey Stick, which is a little bit more on the tech side. So I'll pop that in as well. And then Fundica is a similar type of platform as well that is often used by financial institutions. So I'll pop all of those in the link.
That's fantastic. Got a question from Terrace Noah. who, obviously you can read it, saying that you've really liked your presentation. What's the best way to tap into some of these groups as to provide services such as strategic planning and governance, which are strong areas from our management consulting side?
Yeah, and do you mean from Startup Canada, like this group?
Or I guess any way in which someone could provide their services in the area of business planning, strategic planning.
It's a great question.
Startups.
Yeah, I would say a lot of our startups go the traditional kind of incubator then accelerator route. So there are formal programs that can help you do a lot of this work. There's an organization called CANE, Canada's Incubator and Accelerator Network. And so that is a list of all of these different programs that might be able to support. That's often a first step for sort of the traditional tech-based ventures. If I can actually find this. That might be a link that, oh, there we go, CANE. So CANE route. In terms of finding mentors, there are also a lot of flagship programs that have, reviewing governance, trying to build, your sort of advisory councils, strategic planning overall that do that in a longer fashion. A group like Futurepreneur, that I see that there's another question around age limit. That is for younger ventures. It's under 39 years of age. So it has a slightly different segment, but they provide both capital, mentorship, like strategic planning and governance support, and the resources. So it's sort of a triangle of support for people 39 years and under. There are a couple of other programs like that as well for general entrepreneurs. Some of them are paid, some of them are longer term experience, but it's harder to find just sort of one-off strategic planning insights, I'd say, across the community.
You talked about the Futurepreneur geared to younger entrepreneurs, and I thought it was interesting. Obviously, baby boomers generation startups are down statistically, but the Gen Z or the millennials you had at the same level as the Gen X, which I was surprised to see that up and coming group of very smart people in the millennial leaning towards entrepreneurship. That surprised me, that stat.
Was it the one talking about intentions, the motivating factors?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. That wasn't actually the total number of ventures that were in those different demographics. It was the sentiment of each. So I think your surprise is right, that there is a decrease in the sort of third pillar in that boomer generation, but the motivating factors have shifted generation by generation.
Okay.
Well, I think in our community, we have very few. And what is a senior even is a different, who is just a founder who is, older versus being a true seniorpreneur. There is kind of language there. Within our community, it's definitely tilting much younger. But there's this huge opportunity for people with huge career experience, lots of life experience and working in all these different institutions, but there's no funding for somebody 55 plus. There's no programming that is dedicated to entrepreneurs that are later in their careers. We actually have a great champion, Wendy Mayhew. I'll pop in a link here. She wrote a book around developing businesses after the age of 50. She's this great, very, very vocal champion for the lack of support for what she calls seniorpreneurs. And that I think is still a challenge, especially with an aging population. If you're starting a venture when you're 50, you could have that venture for 20 years. Like there's, the math doesn't really add up. So it's an underserved market, I would actually say, Craig.
Well, what about the millennial market? Are they growing in their entrepreneurial aspirations or goals in real terms?
I would say so. And we see that even in the priorities from government. Like if you look at the federal government, the number of new programs, if you're, 18 to 25, looking to start an idea, getting some seed funding, there are minimum criteria of age for a lot of youth programming from even like financial institutions. So there's so much support if you're young, trying to start a business, and that is trying to kind of build in this pipeline of hopefully, businesses that, successful exits, successful, later stage ventures. But that is a specific perspective of a very particular age demographic. Like that actually is not representative. And in looking at age tech, for example, we might have a lot of younger founders wanting to disrupt an industry. What about all the challenges we see in supporting an aging population? What does that evolution look like? And we see older founders solving those problems versus younger ones that might not be able to empathize with that challenge yet.
Well, if we combine the two together, we'd have a great force, and that's where some of the mentorship kicks in as in some of your approaches, and I think that aligns with a lot of the approaches that the management consulting group here does, as well as providing mentorship and business planning and strategic plans, based on experience, and then find some people who are young and smart with the energy to do all the hard work.
Exactly. But who need the coaching and who don't have that depth of expertise. Like, yes, we want to create this entrepreneurial spirit, but we don't want and to be honest, I think that's why we've seen a lot of businesses fling in all these different directions. Because for 21, like, what experience are you going to have in knowing how to properly scale? You don't. So there's actually a really important balance in bringing the perspectives and age diversity. Like we see that in teams as well. People are prioritizing younger hires, but the ripple effect of not having that diverse perspective from an age standpoint it's compromising. And I feel that even, working in the nonprofit space as well, we need to have a true diverse community, and that includes age.
So one area that has always been a little bit weak, I think, in the innovation industry in Canada is our follow-up, our final, our marketing sales, the last stage of the startup late stage area. So getting to the next stage, you talked earlier in your presentation as being important, and you help businesses, young businesses, startups become more robust so they can have a stronger next stage or successful launching and relaunching and expansion. In Canada, we've always, been really good at inventing innovation, creating, but we seem to be weak in the marketing and sales follow-up. It can be a bit of an issue. Do you see any improvement in that area? And maybe you have some advice in that area.
Yeah, I think of that in the extreme of yay, Canada kind of messaging too. Like we're very shy about talking about Canadian innovation and products that are coming out of Canada. Anthony Lacavera does a really great presentation on this and demonstrating incredible Canadian inventions that kind of got sort of brushed under the rug and then ultimately stolen or sold to an American counterpart. And I think there's the appetite for it. I think, the number of unicorns that we've had over the last 3 years as well, we're on the up and up. But we are still a tiny market. Canada is very, very small. That in order to get onto that global stage, we need our Canadian founders thinking about exporting and looking at the US as an easy and relatively easy pathway to grow their ventures, because you cannot scale or most ventures cannot scale just looking at Canada. There's just not enough people. There's not potentially enough of that segmented target market based on what offering you have. So to be truly globally competitive, we need to think more globally, but keep that IP and keep those businesses in Canada. And that's a challenge too, that you see so many, the typical Silicon Valley type drain, or, even going to places like Texas, where there's so many other benefits that Canada has never even scratched the surface of realizing. The IP side is also huge. It is the worst country, I feel like, to be navigating IP. Takes forever, costs a fortune. And so that we're losing a lot of innovation just based on the bureaucracy of that process too.
Yeah, I've been through a few stories on that side. Hey, a question on disruption. Do you consider that a requirement for startups that have a strong likelihood for success?
I do. At least it doesn't have to be explosive disruption, but there's so much saturation. And I see it every day coming across my desk. The number of, particular, like there was a time when I was getting the same feminine technology product, maybe 15 or 20 of the exact same product with no nuance were coming across my desk for a pitch competition. And yes, that may have been disruptive 3 years ago, that, there weren't a lot of players in that space. Now you need to be in that environment and seeing who you're playing with. And I think that takes courage as well for entrepreneurs to sunset businesses that do not have a space, and then to figure out what is actually that unique value prop, because we don't just need more. It creates a noisy environment. You're going to have such a hard time, to your point about marketing and sales, if you have something that isn't concretely different. And we need founders to realize that faster, or enter into markets where they know they don't have true competitors. It's like, I talk to so many founders that are like, there's no competitors in my space. And if that's really the case, I don't think you're looking hard enough. Like that's never really anybody's answer.
Well, I like what you said about unique value prop, and it ties into one of my, questions here about understanding the advantages of aligning with the SDGs. You talked about Sustainable Development Goals. So maybe explain that a little bit more.
Yeah. So great example. Probably one of the first examples that pops to mind to me is like Tom's shoes. And I know very little about the actual, I'm very cautionary about We Charity kind of stuff, but the idea of Tom's, for every shoe that's sold in North America, a shoe gets, distributed to somebody who needs a pair of shoes. People were jumping onto that bandwagon thinking, oh, well, it's a much more expensive pair of shoe, but that is going to make me feel good. And I'm, putting my money into something that's bigger than me. That was, 10 years ago, maybe, when Tom's started those types of campaigns. We see that all the time now. But what we're seeing from a customer standpoint is people choosing to purchase at a more expensive price point a venture that is doing some type of social good. Cheekbone Beauty is a great example of that right now. Incredible Indigenous founder that created a makeup line. Very similar to, lipsticks, eyeshadows, nothing concretely different about that makeup line. But a lot of the staff that she hires, a lot of the funding that is raised through Cheekbone Beauty goes back into Indigenous communities. And now she's at Sephora. Now she's scaled incredibly because of that social angle, taking a traditional product, but approaching it from a different marketing communications lens as well. And that has been a key success factor of her growth, in addition to being an incredible founder. So we'll see more of that. We'll see those types of businesses hopefully scale as well, because often they hit kind of a bit of a threshold. But now with this evolution in how people are purchasing products, hopefully we'll see that growth as well.
How do we as management consultants work with or fit in with Startup Canada? Like, where do you see some of our synergies?
Yeah. So as I said at the very beginning of the presentation, the more the merrier. You're all welcome to come to Startup Canada events, Startup Canada programs, either for networking to find new potential clients. I'm seeing great comments in the chat functions that yes, they need leadership skills, but where are entrepreneurs getting true management skills? Is that within this community, and bridging them into other existing networks? We do lots of programs. We're doing a full cross Canada tour next year, where we're going in person across to 5 different destinations across Canada. And then we've got lots of, podcasts, lots of sessions where you can either be a passive listener or contribute from a speaking standpoint as well. So absolutely reach out to me if any of the above is appealing to you.
That's fantastic, and we will definitely do that. Just a little question here on the not-for-profits. Tell us a little bit about that, because we do some work with not-for-profits as well through our pro bono program. How does that fit into your whole approach?
Yeah, so we still see mostly for-profit ventures coming into Startup Canada, but there are a lot of nonprofits in the entrepreneurship ecosystem at large, and people trying to build nonprofits as well. It still is a small segment of the community, but Startup Canada is a nonprofit. We benefit greatly from a lot of the supports that come from being in that space. But I would love to see. It's a challenging time to run a nonprofit. Holy moly. So it's, I think wherever you can offer that type of support, it's really well appreciated.
Do you get involved with, I guess, Export Development Corporation and also the Business Development Corp? They have some funding for to help some innovation companies. You've been involved with them a little bit?
100%. Yep. We've got multi-year partnerships with both EDC and BDC. They often support founders later stage. So actually we're kind of pipeline into them when businesses are ready, but lots of support from those types of great institutions.
And I'll remind you again about our management advisory service that we have with NRC and IRAP.
Great.
If you ever have some need for some management consulting advice that we provide through that program.
Fabulous.
Yeah, little plug,
Greg. Love it.
All right, listen, Kayla, we're running out of time. Thank you so much. This is a great topic. It's really important to me. I believe that innovation right now is something that we need in Canada and around the world to stimulate the economy, to get us out of basically the rut that we're in. I don't know if it's an inflation recession or what the heck it is, but it's not great. And I think innovation is a way in which we can get the engines of the economy going, and if there's a social element to it that you've pointed out, fantastic, that all the better. So thank you very much for being our guest today.
You're welcome. It was so much fun. Thanks so much for having me.
I also want to thank CMC Ontario Events Coordinator Sandra Addison Brock. Coming up next month, or hey, next year, join us on January 11th, Adapting Relationship Building for the Virtual World. My guest will be Michael Hughes, LinkedIn guru, master of sales, marketing, relationship building, the good old way, using the newest and latest social media tools. He will help you resurrect your passion and purpose, which is a good way to start the new year. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, everyone. Cheers.